North Korea this morning launched what's presumed to be a hypersonic intermediate-range ballistic missile toward the East Sea. South Korea's commander-in-chief labeled the move as something aimed at dividing the South before the general election. Inflation in South Korea continued to hover in the 3% range in March as higher food costs have pushed the index up. Emergency funding will continue to be injected to ease the stress on households' kitchen tables. Amid prolonged medical disruptions over medical reform, the government has extended its emergency medical system further, urging doctors once again to engage in dialogue and come up with reasonable proposals. It's April 2nd, 2024. This is Newscenter. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Min. North Korea this morning fired what's presumed to be a hypersonic intermediate-range ballistic missile toward the East Sea. President Yoon says this latest launch is aimed at dividing the South ahead of the general election, adding it'll only bring the country closer together. Our defense correspondent Choi Min-jung begins our coverage.
North Korea launched an apparent intermediate-range ballistic missile into the East Sea on Tuesday morning. Seoul's Joint Chiefs of Staff detected the missile at around 6:53 a.m., launched toward the East Sea from the Pyongyang area. It traveled around 600 kilometers, shorter than average for an IRBM, which normally flies between 3,000 to 5,000 kilometers. However, a military official said due to its high speed, Tuesday's missile is likely a hypersonic intermediate-range class ballistic missile. North Korea previously test-fired a solid-fuel hypersonic IRBM in January. And last month, the regime claimed success in a ground test of a solid-fuel engine for a new medium to long-range hypersonic missile. Military officials said Tuesday's launch appears to be an upgrade from January's test firing, as they spotted enhanced missile capabilities with the newly tested solid-fuel engine.
The latest launch is believed to be related to the solid-fuel engine ground test that North Korea publicly revealed in March.
Hypersonic missiles are designed to travel at more than 5 times the speed of sound and often maneuver at relatively low altitudes, making them harder to detect and intercept. IRBMs are weapon systems capable of targeting U.S. military bases in Guam or Japan. Referring to the launch at a cabinet meeting on Tuesday, President Yoon said North Korea's attempts to divide the nation and interfere with the upcoming general election set for next week will only make South Korea unite more tightly. North Korea has previously staged provocations before general elections in South Korea.
이러한 도발은 우리 국민들의 마음을 더 단단히 하나로 묶을 뿐입니다. 우리 군은 북한의 추가 도발에 대비해 만반의 안보 태세를 유지하기 바랍니다.
South Korea's military said it is closely cooperating with the U.S. and Japan to maintain a full readiness stance. The nuclear envoys of Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo also condemned North Korea for its recent missile test and agreed to continue close cooperation to curb Pyongyang's threats ahead of the upcoming election. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Following the North missile launch, South Korea, the U.S., and Japan conducted a trilateral air drill involving the United States B-52H strategic bomber. Seoul's Defense Ministry on Tuesday said this year's first trilateral air drill took place over waters southeast of Jeju Island. The training was designed to improve deterrence and response capabilities against North Korea's involving nuclear and missile threats. Seoul's F-15K fighters and Tokyo's F-2s also participated in the training. The 3 countries vowed to expand trilateral drills to strengthen cooperation against threats from the north. In the meantime, South Korea has imposed another round of sanctions against North Korea, targeting Russian vessels linked to arms transfer to North Korea. Also targeted were 2 Russians and their companies for helping the regime send IT workers to Russia. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Bae Yoon-ji has this report.
South Korea has newly added 2 Russian vessels to its sanctions list for their involvement in arms transfers by North Korea. Announcing this on Tuesday, the Foreign Ministry stressed that the government and the international community have continuously urged North Korea and Russia to halt such military cooperation. The Russian vessels, the Lady R and the Angara, were placed under sanctions for shipping a large number of containers filled with military supplies between Pyongyang and Moscow.
South Korea has announced sanctions as military cooperation between Russia and North Korea, including arms transfers, is a clear violation of UN Security Council resolutions. And these actions can be a serious threat to the Korean Peninsula, as well as global peace and security.
Tuesday's sanctions also included 2 Russian companies and the heads of both, accused of helping North Korea earn foreign currency by illegally sending its information technology workers overseas. The Russian firm Intellect LLC was put on the list for providing documents of identification needed for North Korean workers in Russia. The other company, Sojexvie, was sanctioned for illegally helping North Korean workers enter Russia and to stay there. Meanwhile, the U.S. also assessed Monday that Pyongyang continues to provide military support to Moscow amid the prolonged war in Ukraine. When asked if North Korea was still supplying Russia with weapons during a press briefing, Pentagon Deputy Spokesperson Sabrina Singh said the partnership between the two sides continues to flourish. She added that while Washington has released declassified information on North Korea-Russia military cooperation before, it will not reveal details of recent shipments. Arirang News.
In other news, South Korea's consumer price index accelerated 3.1% on-year in March amid soaring costs of fresh fruits. Moon Hye-ryun has details.
Inflation in South Korea has continued to hover in the 3% range for 2 consecutive months on the back of high prices of fresh fruit. Data from Statistics Korea released on Tuesday shows that the country's consumer price index, a key gauge of inflation, rose 3.1% in March compared to the same month the year before. Core inflation, excluding volatile food and energy prices, came to 2.4%, while the index measuring 144 daily necessities rose 3.8%. This was driven by continued price hikes of fresh produce with poor weather conditions, the rise in prices for fresh fruit in particular increasing by just under 41% on year. Apples and pears saw around an 88% jump in prices, which is their biggest on-year jump since data was first compiled in 1980. Speaking at a meeting to discuss consumer prices, Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok addressed these concerns.
Government is heavily aware of the concerns that people have when doing their grocery shopping and will do its utmost to stabilize inflation to the 2% range.
Several measures to lower fruit prices have been announced. Starting this month, fruit discounts will be raised from 20% to 30%, as well as increasing fruit imports. The Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs aims to supply 50,000 tons of 11 different types of imported fruit, such as bananas and oranges, by the end of June at a 20% discount. And to address the particularly high prices of apples, the government will be expanding contract farming for apples from 49,000 tons last year to 60,000 tons this year, meaning that more apples will be cultivated under government contracts. The Agriculture Ministry has also pledged to set up long-term goals to effectively respond to the root of the problem going forward, climate change, and consider smart farming alternatives to increase yields. Moon Hye-ryun, Arirang News.
Against this backdrop, President Yoon says emergency funds to stabilize the prices of farm goods will continue indefinitely without limits. This came during a cabinet meeting on Tuesday where he said that 150 billion won, or around $110 million has been injected to lower the cost of groceries. He added he felt heavy-hearted that these measures hadn't lowered prices. Yoon also said the discount support and measures for supplying imported fruits are currently focused on large supermarkets, and that they will include smaller markets and traditional ones going forward. The president also called on measures to use online wholesale markets to efficiently get products from producers to consumers. The value of South Korea's food exports hit a fresh high for the first quarter of this year. Data from the Agriculture and Food Ministry on Tuesday showed that the value of these exports reached over $2.2 billion, which is up more than 3% compared to the year before. The United States was the largest market, while the European market saw the largest growth, up nearly 28%. The ministry attributed the hike to an increase in popularity of Korean content, such as dramas that feature food items like ramyeon. South Korea saw a record high amount of foreign direct investment pledges in the first quarter of this year. Data from the Trade Ministry shows that the nation received FDI commitments of around $7 billion from January to March. That's up over 25% compared to the previous year. This was mostly driven by a more than 113% increase in FDI pledges in the electronics sector, such as semiconductors. Investment in the finance and insurance sector also surged, attracting more than 34%. Amid prolonged medical disruptions over medical reform, the government has extended its emergency medical system further, urging doctors once again to engage in dialogue and come up with reasonable proposals. Choi Soo-hyung has the latest.
The government will extend its emergency medical system for one more month to fill the gap in medical services created by the mass walkout by trainee doctors and by medical professors at general hospitals reducing their working hours. An additional 190 billion Korean, around $107 million will be spent on health insurance financing that is supporting the system. The government has also decided to provide an additional 150% as funding to hospitals running critical care and emergency room services. It is continuing to urge trainee doctors to end their collective action. On Tuesday, the Health Ministry called on them to engage in dialogue and suggest reasonable measures for cooperation.
If you stop collective actions and propose unified, rational solutions within the medical community based on science and logic, the government is open to discussions. Please deliver your messages with rational measures prioritizing patient safety.
However, despite continued urging from the government, the medical community has not responded so far. After President Yoon's medical reform speech on Monday, the Korean Medical Association stated that doctors' opinions had not been considered at all. The KMA added that doctors will not move unless the government changes its current plan to expand medical school admissions by 2,000. None of the interns newly accepted this year had registered by Tuesday, the deadline for the new employment registration. Medical professors at general hospitals reduced their working hours for a second day, but a significant reduction in medical services has yet to be seen. While there haven't been any significant changes after outpatient services and surgical procedures were reduced, eyes are now on whether they'll be reduced even further. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
The 4-day voting period for the 22nd general election for those aboard ships began today. From Navy personnel to those aboard fishing trawlers, more than 2,000 people are eligible to vote from ships out at sea. The ballots will reach the National Election Commission by fax. Meanwhile, the regular voting period for people overseas has ended in all regions around the world. According to the NEC on Tuesday, nearly 93,000 people, or over 62% of all eligible overseas voters, have cast their ballots. This is the highest turnout rate for a general election since voting outside the country was introduced in 2012. U.S. trade authorities have reiterated their concerns over South Korea's legislative effort to mandate foreign content providers to pay local internet service providers network usage fees. Park Gon-woo explains.
The U.S. Trade Representative on its 2024 National Trade Estimate Report on foreign trade barriers released on Friday has continued raising issues on pending South Korean bills, calling on foreign online content providers to pay network usage fees. Calling the bills anti-competitive, the report said the National Assembly has been proposing the legislative measures since 2021. The report also said the network usage fees U.S. content providers would have to pay will be profiting the Korean competitors, especially some Korean internet service providers, including SK Broadband, KT, and LG U+, which are also content providers. The bills would also strengthen their grip on the market. Some U.S. companies oppose the measures, even going for litigation. Twitch, Amazon's streaming platform, suspended its service in Korea at the end of February. In the report, USTR also raised issue with Korea's restrictions on agricultural biotechnology, delaying the approval of new tech products. But the length of this year's report dealing with Korea was 2 pages shorter than of last year's and 18% shorter overall. In the foreword, there was a sentence that didn't appear last year, that each trading partner has a sovereign right to adopt measures in furtherance of legitimate public purposes. U.S. Chamber of Commerce Senior Vice President and Head of International John Murphy said in a statement that there's the risk of giving the green light to other foreign governments to raise barriers against U.S. exports or otherwise discriminate against U.S. companies. 박건우, Arirang News.
Elsewhere, Iran claims an Israeli attack on its embassy in Syria killed a top commander and has thus affirmed its right to retaliate. Lee Seung-jae with more.
In what may further escalate the already tense situation in the Middle East, Iran says Israel is responsible for bombing its embassy in Syria. According to local media, the Iranian embassy in Damascus was bombed with Israeli warplanes suspected of being responsible. Tehran claimed that the attack killed 7 military advisors, including 3 senior commanders. However, Israel has not claimed a responsibility for the attack, with an Israeli military spokesman only saying that it does not comment on reports in the foreign media. The Syrian foreign minister and an interior minister were at the scene in the aftermath of the attack, both condemning what they called a terrorist attack that killed innocent people. In response to the consulate bombing, Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Nasser Kanani said Tehran preserves the right to respond to the Damascus consulate attack. He added that Iran will decide later how to respond and punish the aggressor. Iran's top diplomat Hossein Amir Abdollahian earlier pointed to Israel as being the mastermind behind the attack and said the attack violated all international agreements. Since October 7th last year, when armed conflict between Israel and Hamas began, Israel has targeted military installations belonging to Iran and those of its proxies in Syria. Monday's attack would mark the first Israel attack on an embassy compound since the conflict began. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
These days, workplaces are undergoing changes, as some call the trend Office Big Bang era. Jumping in this trend, Korea's Jeju Island recently introduced a new type of office culture. Our culture correspondent Song Yoo-jin reports on what that is.
It's a typical workday on Jeju Island. Inside the 7-story building in Jeju City, Kim Sung-uk is busy at work. Kim works for the Jeju provincial government, but today, instead of heading to the government complex, he's here at a second office. So this is a 소통 center or communication center in Jeju City. So here, people can read books and try out a wide range of cultural activities like carpentry and cooking, but for some, this is another office. Kim is among the more than 60 participants in the Jeju Special Self-Governing Province's Another Office project. In March, Jeju became the first local government in Korea to launch this initiative.
The office environment has a profound impact on human behavior, cognition, and psychology. Yet, the public sector tends to be rigid, making it challenging to foster cognitive flexibility and creativity. So we started exploring alternative office spaces outside.
Currently, there are 13 of these offices across the island, 8 in Jeju City and 5 in Seogwipo City. About 800 level 6 or below Jeju government employees are eligible to apply. They just have to select a date and location and sign up a week before. For them, it's an opportunity to enhance their work efficiency, which is why Kim Sung-uk has already used the program 3 times.
Tasks like documenting last year's work require my full attention. In the office, I sometimes spend the whole day on something that could be done in 1 or 2 hours. Especially when my boss calls, I help out colleagues or receive multiple phone calls. So I saw another office as the perfect solution for staying focused. Communicating with my colleagues is not a problem as I can do so via phone, video calls, and online messaging.
For the government, there is no financial burden as all of these offices are public or government-owned buildings. While Jeju is the only region that has adopted this system so far, this reflects a growing trend in Korea's workplace culture.
After COVID, many companies have adopted remote working or working outside traditional office settings. Local governments, particularly outside the major cities, see this trend as a way to attract talent and boost their economies.
Throughout the year, Jeju plans to open up more workspaces and expand participation so that more people can have their own another office. 송유진, 아리랑 뉴스, 제주.
The spring colors are coming out, with cherry blossoms officially blooming in Seoul since yesterday. The nationwide temperature is significantly higher than it was this time last year. Highs in Seoul exceeded 22 degrees Celsius, showing the warmest weather this spring. There was clear spring weather today, but it will rain in most parts of the country tomorrow. This rain will be concentrated on Jeju Island and the south coast. More than 150 millimeters of heavy rain is expected in the mountainous areas of Jeju Island and up to 80 millimeters over the south coast. Caution is necessary as heavy rain of up to 30 millimeters per hour will fall on these areas with gusts of wind and lightning from tonight. The rain will mostly stop around tomorrow evening. A warm morning will be seen throughout the country tomorrow. Seoul and Daegu will start off at 12 degrees. Daily highs will move up to 20 in Seoul, Gwangju 17 degrees Celsius. There will be warm spring weather with temperature swings for the rest of the week. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world. That is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session up next.
Welcome. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니? 한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
안녕하세요, 레이트입니다. 네, 저희 루네이트가 슈퍼파워로 ASC에 왔습니다. 예. 에너지를 받고 싶으시다면 많은 것이 부탁드리겠습니다.
그럼 지금까지
루네이트였습니다. 감사합니다.
Hello and welcome to Within the Frame. I'm Han-Dan in Seoul. It's been 6 months since the war between Israel and Hamas broke out in the Gaza Strip, but violence rages on and the humanitarian crisis worsens. Talks between the two sides remain in a deadlock as fears grow over Israel's possible invasion of Gaza's southern city of Rafah, where over 1.5 million civilians are taking shelter. Concerns are also rising over an expansion of the war as tensions escalate. between Israel and Iran-backed forces in neighboring countries. Israel-Hamas war 6 months on. That's the topic of our discussion today. And joining us in the studio is Choi Hyun-jin, Associate Professor at Kyunghee University's Department of Political Science. Thank you for coming in.
Glad to join Within the Frame.
Also with us tonight is Aiden Haher, reader in international relations at University of Westminster. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Professor Che, let's start with you. Israel and Hamas, they were expected to resume talks over the weekend, but talks weren't materialized. The Hamas leadership, they did not show up at the scheduled talks in Cairo, and Israel has also recalled most of its delegations. What is the main cause of the long deadlock between the two sides?
Yes, the talks between Hamas and Israel in Cairo, Egypt, have not made much progress because both sides have demands that the other side finds unacceptable. So, for example, the Hamas proposed a ceasefire deal that includes several stages and specific demands, including the release of Israeli hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners, as well as a permanent ceasefire and the complete withdrawal of all Israeli forces from Gaza Strip. However, Israel believes that these Hamas demands are not realistic, saying that even if there is a long pause in the fighting, the war will not end until Hamas is terminated. So this conflict between Israel and Palestine has begun since 1947. And since then, there has been numerous attempts for ceasefire and peace agreement, but those efforts have not made a permanent peace. And therefore, Israel does not believe a word such as permanent ceasefire. And also, from Israeli point of view, a ceasefire and the withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza will only give Hamas a chance to regroup, rearm, and prepare for another surprise attack against Israel in the future. And therefore, both sides have a different opinion. The Hamas wants a permanent ceasefire, while Israel wants a complete victory. And therefore, it is hard to narrow the gap between these two different perspectives.
So I think that's the key. Hamas is demanding a permanent ceasefire as well as withdrawal of Israeli troops, whereas Israel is strongly against that, calling it unrealistic. And the only and ultimate goal for Israel is total victory over the Hamas militants.
Yes, it is.
And so, well, truth be told, it seems like there is no breakthrough, at least not for the time being.
It's hard.
Now to you, Professor Haher. All the while, Israel is not letting up with its attacks on Gaza, and mediators are still attempting to maintain an open channel of communication between Israel and Hamas. What's your assessment of where the two sides stand in their negotiations, and what are your prospects?
Well, I would agree with my colleague there that the Israeli position is one where they want complete victory, and anything less than that they see as unacceptable. I think it's important to note that this really isn't a conflict between Israel and Hamas. It's a conflict between the Israeli government and the Palestinians as a whole. You know, the tactics that Israel is using are not targeted. They're clearly not just aimed at degrading Hamas. They are an attempt to ethnically cleanse Gaza of Palestinians, the summary execution of medical staff, the bombing of hospitals, you know, significant evidence of war crimes. These are all tactics employed by Israel to destroy the Palestinian people as a whole, rather than Hamas. And unfortunately, if you have one party to a conflict that seeks the complete annihilation of the other party, it's almost impossible to have any kind of negotiations with them. Netanyahu and the Israeli government more generally have evidently calculated that they're so far steeped in blood now that they might as well keep going. They can't turn back. You know, the only way that they can survive politically is if they manage to achieve their ideal of a complete victory, which therefore means that negotiations are almost impossible. And that has significant implications, of course, for the Israeli hostages that are being detained by Hamas. And that's caused significant unrest amongst the Israeli people themselves, who have been demonstrating against the tactics employed by Netanyahu during the negotiations. So unfortunately, so long as you have a government in power in Israel at the moment that is so extreme, that is so evidently willing to engage in the most heinous barbarity, the chances of there being any negotiated settlement are very slim.
And your remarks are being echoed by many experts around the world that the likely trajectory over the next few months, at least, will be much more bloodshed than a durable ceasefire. Now, Professor Che, Israeli officials held virtual talks with their U.S. counterparts on Monday, and according to the White House, Israel has agreed to take Washington's concerns over Rafah into consideration, but it remains unclear if the talks will stop Israel from pressing ahead with its invasion of Rafah. What are your anticipations?
Yes, the Washington and Jerusalem held a virtual meeting to discuss about the planned invasion of Rafah. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said like this: "We will enter Rafah because there's no victory without eliminating the Hamas fighters in Rafah." So, however, U.S. President Joe Biden have expressed a strong concern about this invasion plan because such an action would only worsen the humanitarian crisis in Gaza Strip, leading to more civilian deaths. And the President Biden urged Israel to ensure the safety of Palestinian people currently sheltering in Rafah. So there was a virtual meeting between these two sides. And as you said, after the meeting, Israel said, "We will take Washington's concern." So I guess these two parties, Washington and Jerusalem, have discussed to find a possible balance between Israel's security needs and Rafah's humanitarian needs. But unfortunately, I think finding such a balance is very difficult. This is because Hamas fighters are now hiding among Palestinian people in Rafah. So that means there would be no Israeli victory without entering Rafah. Yet, any ground battle in Rafah will generate a serious number of civilian deaths. So I really hope that both the United States and Israel will prioritize civilian lives over winning the battle in Rafah.
According to CNN, the U.S. officials presented their Israeli counterparts with some other alternatives to an assault on Rafah. Again, the meeting ended with no breakthrough or any promises. So it is very concerning indeed. Now, back to you, Dr. Hayher. We're seeing some signs of an expansion of the war in the Middle East. Iran vowed a decisive response after a strike it blamed on Israel killed 2 of its top commanders and 5 others at its consulate in Syria. And this came after Israeli Defense Minister Gallant hinted at Israel's reported airstrikes in Syria and Lebanon, saying that Israel is transitioning from defense to pursuit of Hezbollah. Why is Israel preparing for an escalation of conflict against Iran-backed forces?
Well, again, I think it's important to understand the nature of the Israeli government at the moment and to really appreciate why they're doing what they're doing. That the man you quoted there, Gallant, he's the guy who described the Palestinians as human animals and called for a complete siege on Gaza. He openly said he wanted to starve the people of Gaza and deprive them of water. So this is a man who has publicly expressed the desire to commit a mass atrocity. So the nature of the Israeli government is one which appears to have very little compunction about breaking not just international law, but just basic moral standards. And in terms of their regional ambitions. What they evidently seek to do now is to try to, cover their own actions by creating a regional conflict. If they can, inspire other countries to become involved in this, enemy states like Syria and Iran, then they hope that that will mean that the Western allies will come in on their side to fight what would appear to be a regional conflagration. So, again, it shows how completely morally bankrupt the Israeli government is, that they are actually trying to inspire a regional war in the hope that that will then camouflage their own actions in Palestine and force their Western allies to come in on their side. And it's an extremely dangerous tactic, and one which, of course, could cause massive loss of life throughout the Middle East. And as I say, it's a damning indictment of the morality and the lack thereof of the Israeli government.
So Israel is intentionally widening the conflict in the region as part of efforts to camouflage their own action, and also perhaps to get the Western powers, the Western allies involved in the conflict as well. Now, Professor Che, the UN Security Council adopted a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire, but Israel is continuing with its attacks in Gaza, asserting that the resolution is not legally binding. How do you perceive the current situation, and are there any additional measures the international community can take?
A so-called resolution is a strong action that the UN Security Council can take, and the resolutions are usually considered legally binding. But however, this resolution has led to a debate over its interpretation. For example, the U.S. representative to the UN said that she didn't agree with everything in this resolution, but she did support some of the critical goals in this non-binding resolution. And Israel also argues that this is not legally binding, saying that this war against Hamas is a self-defense measure for Israeli security. So the using force for self-defense is the only type of military action that is allowed by UN Charter. And therefore, that's why the Israel says it's non-binding. Right? But however, the Chinese representative argues that this is legally binding. So, but however, I believe that there's more important issue than binding or non-binding debate. The really important issue is whether it is possible to enforce this resolution. So I think it is not easy, because even if Israel does not comply with the resolution, the United States, which is a close Israeli ally, will not allow Security Council members to push for economic sanctions against Israel. So President Joe Biden is running for re-election in this November. And therefore, he is unlikely to take a position that would anger the Jewish voters at home, even if Israel is criticized by the international community. And therefore, I believe that it is not easy to enforce this resolution because of the possible veto of the United States. And therefore, in sum, it is not easy to enforce this resolution, regardless of whether it is binding or non-binding.
So whether it's legally binding or not, it's not as important as actually finding practical ways to implement the resolution. But that also seems quite bleak for the moment, especially with the U.S. presidential election coming up. Professor Haher, according to the Washington Post, the U.S. has quietly approved transfer of warplanes and weapons to Israel worth $2.5 billion, given that the U.S. has been trying hard to talk Israel out of its planned invasion of Rafah. How do you interpret this report?
Well, again, like my colleague said there, it is important to understand the geopolitics surrounding this particular situation. Obviously, the massacres that are taking place on a daily basis in Gaza at the moment could be stopped immediately if Israel wanted to stop it. Israel doesn't appear to want to stop it. But if the United States stopped supporting Israel and took a very forceful stance against what Israel is doing, then that would likely stop the violence. Now, as much as the Security Council resolution, which is, I think, most international lawyers would say it is by definition binding, but as much as that was welcome, it's very difficult to, again, as my colleague said there, see how that's actually going to be enforced in practice. And the fact that the United States is calling for a ceasefire whilst actually supplying Israel with these weapons is a massive contradiction. And it's worth noting that these are weapons that are designed to kill civilians indiscriminately. You know, one of the missiles that they've sent to them is a 2,000-pound bomb, which can inflict damage on people 1,000 feet away. So you hit a target and people 1,000 feet away are killed. It is by definition indiscriminate. It is not the type of weaponry you would use to target Hamas fighters. It's the type of weaponry you would use to destroy civilian populations, to inflict damage on a wide area. And Israel has proved itself time and time again to be more than willing to commit war crimes, to target civilian areas, you know, not inadvertently, but to actually specifically target hospitals and slaughter people in that particular way. And the United States is supporting that. The United States is supplying Israel with the weapons it is using to commit war crimes. And in that context, then, it is ultimately leaving itself open to being charged with complicity in war crimes, if not genocide.
Well, the U.S. has been openly for a very long time urging Israel to dial back on its attacks in Gaza. And so this approval does send, as you've pointed out, an entirely different signal, a huge contradiction there. Professor Che, France is reportedly seeking to put forth a draft resolution at the UN Security Council that includes all the criteria for a two-state solution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The solution has long been supported by the international community, including the U.S., but Netanyahu is strongly against it. What is a two-state solution, and what's your take on it?
The two-state solution proposes establishing an independent Palestinian state alongside Israel, living in peace and security together. So this concept is based on the resolution of territorial disputes and also ensuring both people's rights and sovereignty. And this idea has broad international support as a fair approach to ending the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But however, achieving this solution faces significant challenges, including disagreements over borders, the status of Jerusalem, and security concern, and the political conditions within both communities. There's Palestine and also Israel. So my take is that while the two-state solution is very ideal for peace, but the actual implementation is difficult to succeed. The biggest challenge comes from the political nature of a Palestinian community itself. The two-state solution assumes that there is a single Palestinian community. But however, in reality, there are two rival factions. The one is Hamas in Gaza Strip, and the other is Fatah in West Bank. And they are rival, and they are geographically separated, and also they even went to civil war each other in 2006 and 2007. And therefore, my question is, who can represent the Palestinian community? And who is the partner for Israel? And who can control this Palestine community? So we need to settle this problem first before implementing the two-state solution.
So a two-state solution would be ideal, but its implementation is much more challenging than we think due to all the complicated political issues that need to be considered before we actually start discussing the implementation of a two-state solution. And Dr. Haher, we also want to hear your take on the two-state solution.
Well, it's taken over 6 months for the UN Security Council to agree to a resolution calling for a ceasefire. You know, the idea that we can now move to creating a two-state solution is patently ridiculous. This is an idea that's been floated by countries that want to appear to be engaged and appear to be doing the right thing, but this is not something that's going to happen anytime soon. It's we can't even get Israel to agree not to commit genocide against the Palestinians. We can't get Israel to stop famine in the Palestinian territories. The idea that Israel is now going to agree to a two-state solution, it's just utterly implausible. It's obviously what the vast majority of observers of this conflict for decades have been saying is the only viable solution, but there are significant issues that need to be resolved, significant obstacles that need to be overcome, particularly the status of Jerusalem. And again, as my colleague said there, the fact that the Palestinian territories are not joined together is obviously a major issue. But really, at the moment, the focus cannot be on a two-state solution. It has to be on stopping Israel from committing mass atrocity crimes against the Palestinians.
So the two-state solution seems like a distant dream for now, when the international community can't even get Israel to comply with a ceasefire resolution and stop famine and stop the humanitarian crisis that's worsening in Gaza. Well, more than 32,000 Palestinians have been killed, and like I mentioned, the humanitarian crisis only worsening. And at the end of the day, it's really the innocent civilians who are getting affected the most. So hopefully, although the outlook looks bleak, hopefully Israel and Hamas will find a way to meet halfway. Thank you so much, Professor Haher, as well as Dr. Che, for sharing your insights with us. And that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in same time tomorrow to join our conversation. Goodbye for now.